You know, I think one of the inevitable points you reach as a photographer is the moment you realize how important post-processing is. And if anything, this stage can be quite frustrating. I know for me, when I first started out, I didn't really want anything to do with editing images. I just wanted to be a photographer, be out in the field using my camera. So I put very little effort into learning processing, and I did the absolute minimum. And I'll tell you what, the results certainly showed in my work, and there was an astronomical improvement to my images once I finally committed to learning a solid post-processing workflow. So that's what I want to share with you here today, a very short and simple procedure that you can apply to your work. And this is really aimed at people who maybe are just starting out with their post-processing, or maybe you're just stuck on a bit of a plateau and you're not quite happy. I find there's almost two camps here. You either have the camp that has a lot of knowledge, and if anything, maybe too much knowledge. And then there's the other extreme where you're just kind of putting in the bare minimum and doing whatever it takes to just scrape by. So let me simplify things for you, give you a solid workflow and approach that is going to apply and be effective to your photography. And it doesn't matter if you're using Lightroom Classic or using Adobe Camera Raw, which is what I use via Photoshop, you're going to be able to follow along. So let's jump in. We'll go through step by step and do a start to finish on a forest photo that I have here. Here I am in Adobe Camera Raw via Photoshop. If you use Lightroom Classic, you'll see the layout is very, very similar, so you can follow along regardless of what program. Here's what I want you to remember, guys, when you're getting into your post-processing. Keep this in mind, LCL. And what I mean by that is light, color, local adjustments. This is going to give you a framework moving forward, a bit of a game plan with all your images on what order to approach things. LCL, light, color, local adjustments. So let's break that down and do that exactly to this image. It's always good to have a game plan and pre-visualize the final result before you even begin processing. It kind of makes sense, doesn't it? You want to know what you're trying to achieve. So maybe it's a sunset, the sky's really washed out and the colors are washed out. Your goal might be, I want to bring back the colors. In this particular image here, I want the greens to stand out a lot more, and I want to have some light in the distance to help pull the eye through this frame. Okay, so just develop a bit of a goal of how you want the final image to be. Then we jump into the LCL. So let's start with the L for light. I'm going to open up the light panel. What I mean by light is anything to do with exposure. You might be recovering highlights, you might be raising up shadows, so on and so forth. In this image, I'm going to brighten things up. It looks a little bit dark to me, and when I look at the histogram, there's no bright tones in here whatsoever. I'm going to brighten up the exposure, and I'm also going to raise the shadows partly, just to get a bit more detail out in those darks. I'm going to leave that there for now because I want to do the rest of the light adjustments when I do my local adjustment. Let's move on to color, okay? Nice and quick and easy. Sometimes I'll use the profile, which by default here is coming up as Adobe Color. Sometimes I'll use the landscape profile, and when I select that, you see instantly it gives a bit more punch to the colors, and it will often slightly adjust the tones as well. I think it's worth applying, checking the results, and if you like them, great. Every now and then, if it's a really crazy sunrise or sunset with a lot of rich tones, you might find that that landscape profile just overdoes things. Otherwise, I find that it does a pretty good job. So that's first and foremost with color. The other part of color is, as you can imagine, opening up the color tab and adjusting the vibrance, saturation, temperature, and tint. Now, I often find on these forest scenes, naturally, my camera just seems to want to have a lot of magenta in there. So sometimes I'll bring that back into the green more. So I'll go overboard and you can kind of see what that's doing. So for this photo, I might leave it around here. So I've brought it back from 30 to like 22. With the temperature, personal preference, sometimes I want to cool, sometimes I want to warm. It just totally depends. In this case, I might cool it slightly. I just like the type of atmosphere that's creating, having that cooler color palette. Works well with the green. Vibrance and saturation. Now, vibrance is working on our midtones, and then saturation is your shadows and highlights. So you'll find that you'll often apply more vibrance than you do saturation, if any. So in this case, I'd maybe go vibrance about 15. Vibrance, saturation, I won't really touch it. If I do, it'll be minimal. 4, 5, somewhere around there. Maybe a touch more on the vibrance. The other part of color that I want to teach you is the color grading. And this is where we can work on midtones, shadows, and highlights and change the hue, the color tone of that tone itself. So for example, midtones, which is a lot of this image, maybe we want to be cooler. I could move this outer circle into the cool tones, the blue, and then to apply the saturation, you've probably seen me do this in teaching before, you hold shift to stay fixed on that hue, click and drag down, and now I'm increasing that blue to the midtone. So you can see the background on this is getting quite blue. Maybe I want to green it, so you're going for more of that forest green. One thing you'll probably want to experiment with is warming your highlights and cooling your shadows. That works great on most golden hour, sunrise, sunset photography, even portraits. In this photo, I'm not really going to bother doing that. Maybe I would cool the shadows slightly. Let's have an experiment there. That looks okay. A touch blue, it's very subtle. Otherwise, that's all. But keep that in mind, the grading is very powerful. So we've done the light, the exposure, we've done some color adjustments. The last thing is what I said, the local adjustments. Local means how do we work on this file in individual zones instead of globally everything at once. If we do before and after now, I'm going to push P on the keyboard, before, after. So everything now has been global. Push backslash if you're in Lightroom to do the before and after. So how do we get into the local adjustments? We click what they call the masking tool here, and you have all these options. The only one I'm concerned with is the brush here. The shortcut is K. Select the brush, and personally I like to have the feather, flow and density at 100. This means it's a very soft brush, and when I click it will apply 100% of my adjustment. The inner circle will get 100% and then it fades out to 0%. So let me show you an example. Let's say we want to brighten. I'm now on the brush, and anything I do now will only apply to the edge of my brush. I'm going to bring up exposure. Let's say one stop. When I click now, that one stop applied on the very inner part of our brush, and then it gently faded to half, 0.3, and then outwards. It's a very nice way to use the brush. That's because the feather is at 100. If we have the feather, say 0, see it becomes one solid brush to work with. Okay, ready? Bang. So there's no gradient anymore. It just applies 100% to the circle, and there's no natural fade out. I don't like using it that way. So just keep it in mind, all right? By default, it might not be, the feather may not be 100. So push K, bring that feather up. Now we've got a soft brush. So what do I do with local adjustments? Anything and everything. In our case, I'm probably going to use it more for some of that light, okay? Transition the eye through the frame. So I may, for example, bring up some exposure for the background here. And I'm just going to click in the distance, which is naturally where the light is anyway. And I'm just enhancing it. Now, maybe it's too strong. I'll dial it back a little bit. About like there. Let me turn that on and off now. Over in the masking tab, click on and off. Your masking tab may be sitting over here. That's so annoying. It's a pain in the butt. Click it, drag it, drop it in this main section to get it out of the way. What else do I do with that brush? In this case, maybe look at the beautiful light on these ferns. Very gentle and soft. I'm going to zoom out. K gives me a new brush, and a common thing I'll use is the whites. Bringing up the white will lift anything with some light on it. I'm just going to click here, once, twice, even on the other side. It's very, very subtle. The whites is very gentle because there's minimal light in there anyway. So you can see what that's doing. Maybe I'll click up here in the distance on that moss, in that center area. You can kind of run along and go with the flow. You know, just flow with it, work through and watch in real time what it's doing. So you'll notice when I push K, I get a new brush. I always put my adjustment on first. It just makes common sense to me to have something on the edge of the brush, what you think you want to use. Let's lift up some shadows and blacks and emphasize the depth in this image. So anything back here now will have lighter shadows and blacks, which it has anyway because of the fog, but this just emphasizes it further. So I have a guess of what I want on the sliders, and the more you do it, the closer you get with your guessing on what you may want. Then you can come down and tweak it and adjust accordingly, before, after. Now, if I push K and get a new brush, If you do not put anything on first, you'll get these red strokes showing you where you're brushing. I just think that's very inorganic. It makes more sense in my mind to put something on the edge, start painting, and then watch in real time what it's doing. And if you like it, you may keep going with it into areas that you probably may not have went if you were just painting beforehand with nothing on the brush. We worked on the light, we adjusted our colors, and then we've done some local adjustments. If we do a before and after now, before, after. Most of the time, that could be it for your post-processing. 95% of the time, to be honest. Work on the light, work on the colors, do some local adjustments. Keep that framework in mind, and it's really going to simplify things for you and just give you that solid starting point. Now, of course, there's so many variables. It just depends on the raw file that you're bringing in, what the exposure's like, so on and so forth. I know there's a lot to it, but this type of workflow and that framework is going to just help you move forward and maybe make it less daunting, because I know how daunting it can be when you're first starting out. I do go a lot more in depth with processing and this type of workflow. If you're interested in that, just check out the link below, and I've got a full masterclass showing this exact workflow. Otherwise, right here, what do I do now? And I teach this to all my students, and I stick to this myself for over 10 years now. Let it marinate. You cannot be finished with your edit on the first run through. I just truly believe you will get a better result if you come back with fresh eyes and look at the image again, and I almost guarantee you'll make some kind of adjustment. Now, what that adjustment is, we don't know. It could be brightening, darkening, it could be more color, less color, so on and so forth. You're not gonna get the best result on that first sitting. You can get very close, for sure. So I let it marinate. Create for yourself a drafts folder, and then this is where you can save it. So I'd export out of here, and I'll just navigate to my drafts folder, and I'll save that as either a PSD, a Photoshop document, or if you're a Lightroom user, you can save it as a TIFF file. And these are high-res, uncompressed files. So every time you open them, we're coming back with the image that hasn't been compressed whatsoever, but you're making it a separate file from the raws. And let it sit there, come back, give it minimum a couple of hours really, to be honest, and just look at it again, and you'll probably make a few adjustments. And personally, I don't just let it marinate for 1 or 2 passes over. I want to look at it several times over before I'm confident that I've got it to a point where I'm happy with it. Now, it's going to be personal preference. There's no rush, okay? Don't let social media or family or friends make you think that you need to turn out the work very quickly. Take your time, enjoy the process, and you're going to get a lot better results. If you're rushing, you're probably going to look back later and go, what was I thinking? I've totally stuffed that up. So just slow it down. Light, color, local adjustments. I hope this video helps you out. I know what it's like when you first start out to just be a bit frustrated or maybe daunted with the whole post-processing side of things. It doesn't have to be hard or over the top. You don't need dozens of layers in Photoshop building up. You don't need to be going overboard, blending multiple exposures and stitching things together. 95% of the time, a workflow like this is all you need. And this type of workflow I've been using for years on end now. Completely happy with the results. So hopefully it works for you, or at least just gives you some food for thought, because ultimately there's no right or wrong. There's so many ways that you can get the same result. Just find what works for you. I'm totally open to how you want to, different people like to work differently. This workflow works for me. It's something I developed over the years. It's nice and simple, and it works well for teaching as well. So anyway, I'll leave it there, guys. Thanks for viewing. If you have any comments, questions, please leave them below. Thumbs up always helps with the channel. Otherwise, I hope to see you in a video soon. I'll see you next week.